Hi, I'm Jesse Mecham. I'm going to have a productive conversation with Mike Vardy.
This is a conversation that I need to have. I need to have it because I want to make sure I stick to the idea of personal finance and making it happen. Professional finance as well. When I talked to Mike Michalowicz, which of course is an episode in the archives before, we talked about profit first, amongst, other things, including his more recent book. This time I get to talk to Jesse Mecham, who is the founder of You Need a Budget, to talk about personal finance, the relationships to productivity. This is a great conversation. I'm so happy that we're able to bring it to you today. So let's get to it. First off, Jesse is a personal finance expert. So this is not just a conversation with anybody. He's also a speaker and a business leader. He hosts the You Need a Budget podcast, which you should also subscribe to, and the Beginning Balance podcast. He's also the Wall Street Journal best-selling author of You Need a Budget. He's a self-proclaimed recovering CPA and is deeply passionate about teaching individuals, families, and business owners YNABs, 4 rules to help them gain total control of their money. You're going to hear about that and much more during this conversation. So let's get to it. Here is my conversation with Jesse Mecham. Enjoy. Jesse, I needed to have you on this program because I needed to learn how to budget and I needed to have better control over my finances because I've got a handle on time and tasks to a degree.
Yes.
But the thing I've always struggled with, and you can talk to Mrs. Vardy about this, is money. And we tried so many different things, but it was You Need a Budget that kind of landed. So I'm really excited to have you on the program today. Thanks for taking the time to join me.
Absolutely. I'm glad to be here. And I'm always happy to be chatting with someone that's an actual bona fide user. So this will be fun.
And I've been listening to the audiobook, which I've been, so I've been listening to your audiobook, which we'll link to in the show notes, as well as the all the other places you can get it. But and you talk about in the book the story of like why you started You Need a Budget and what it kind of it seemed to me like it was a bit of a side project, right? And it kind of just took off from
absolutely.
There, right?
Mm-hmm,
Go ahead and share that a little bit.
Yeah, so my wife and I got married young. We were both working for $10 an hour, going to school at the university. Got married, and you combine two people's finances that aren't making a lot of money. There's zero synergy. It's just you're still just like, okay, still poor. But I knew we needed to focus on watching those. I'd say pennies. I was going to say dollars. It might have been pennies back then. It was tight.
Yeah.
We also decided a few months later, we're like, we want to have a baby. So the baby was the real impetus. We wanted Julie, my wife, to be able to step out of the workforce and just focus on doing the mom thing. And we wouldn't be able to make it through school for me where I could finish up, getting an accounting degree, work for an accounting firm. We wouldn't have been able to do that without either taking on debt, which I did not want to do, or having Julie stay in the workforce, which we did not want her to do.
Right.
So that was where I thought, okay, this little spreadsheet that I'd made for just me and Julie, literally a spreadsheet. I thought maybe other people would want to buy this spreadsheet from us. And so I launched youneedabudget.com back in September of 2004 and realized about 6 months in that it should be real software, but it wasn't making enough money to do anything with it. Ran it for about a year and a half as a spreadsheet little business. And sometimes people will say, well, how did you keep people from stealing it, copying it? You didn't. You just trusted humanity at that point. And but a little while later, it was early 2006 where I had scraped together enough money, intending originally to buy a house with it, because this was 2006, Mike, and you remember you had to buy a house in 2006 or thereabouts. So we kind of were like, we're going to forego the house and we're going to pay someone to build actual software, replace this spreadsheet. And from there, we've just done the whole tech iteration game. The phones came out a couple years later. We started working on those. The iPad came out. The web started becoming a thing. You started being able to run really nice, smooth web apps. And so here we are. We're even on Alexa. You can ask her, hey, Alexa, how much is in my groceries category? And she'll tell you, or your friends if they ask her. So you got to be careful.
We've done that. We've added things. We're like, hey, we just bought this. We just bought that. I mean, it's really, I'm kind of glad Alexa doesn't go, you've gone over on your liquor budget, Mike. I'm like, no. I don't need to hear about that. I don't need.
Again, Mike, again. Yeah. We have a skill for that, and then she pushes some other skill for you, but yeah.
What I loved about it is that, I mean, one of the things I grew up learning about was, well, you learned about it from your parents, really. Like that's how you
hopefully.
learned about finance. Well, hopefully, but
yes, I should say you're right. Either way, you learned something.
You did,
yeah,
right.
Absolutely.
And so the two things you're not taught about in school are the things that we are experts in. You're an expert in money and money management. I'm an expert in time management. And those are things that are not really kind of gone into great detail in school growing up. So one of the things that I've really liked about this using You Need a Budget is that it gets things there's a simplicity to it, right? You know what I mean? Like there is this, this is what you have. This is how you work with it. But there is some willpower involved. Like you can't you set your budget up and then you kind of, you have to make sure you stick within the categories. What are some tips for people who, if they're using You Need a Budget, and if you're not, you totally should be because it's fantastic. And it's converted me into somebody who can actually save money. And especially, again, like you, my wife and I are both self-employed. We can't, it's feast or famine sometimes, depending on the time of year, right? So how do you... One of the things that I think is important for people to know is not just about the moving the numbers around and making it work, but also making sure that you stick to that budget. What are some of the tips that you can kind of offer people who maybe struggle with that, despite having those intentional kind of line items in there?
Yeah, one is just to give yourself loads of grace. So you're just starting out. You're the worst. My second son, he's just learning to drive. Yep. He's got his permit, big deal. And he sits behind the wheel and he's a competent individual. I was telling my wife, I said, confident incompetence is the worst thing. He's not confidently incompetent. So I just told him, I said, hey man, just so you know, I'm not trying to offend you, but you are at this moment, the world's worst driver. And we drove around in the parking lot and practiced driving between lines and all this stuff. And at the end, he's like, am I still the world's worst driver? I said, absolutely. You still absolutely are, but we'll get there. And I wanted a friend as for him, like, you're the worst, but we're going to get in the car every day and practice this. With budgeting, people will come in. I mean, they maybe haven't ever done this in their lives. Yeah. And they're just expecting perfection. So the first thing is there is no perfect. It's not a budget. It is a process. It is budgeting, right? And so it's just this process of looking at what you have and asking yourself, is this still what I want my money to do? And, I was going to, maybe we can get into this a little bit, but the time and money is just downstream from time. So you're upstream a little further on, and you're just saying, hey, everybody, here's how you manage your energy. And, you manage your time, you funnel your energy into this unit of time, and then value pops out. And then hopefully if real value pops out, you see it represented as $1. And so I'm really a productivity expert just with the different unit of measurement. We both just we want them to be productive. You want time to be used well. You want people to be productive. And I'm just saying, okay, now that we've worked so hard, we've optimized, we're giving ourselves grace in how we manage our day and being ahead of everything and making sure that we're doing the right things. So many people, they're so good at that. And then as soon as all that effort is translated into $1, they're just like, that's not for me. It's like, no, it's the same thing. It's still just effort. It's just stored up in this little piece of paper, ones and zeros on your screen. But that's the key. Yeah, it's the journey too. That's the other thing too, is I think a lot of people are like, I can't wait for time. They're and their to-do list, can't wait to get it all done. I'm like, and with money too, it's like there's these two universal things that are ongoing. Once you get your head wrapped around that, you're never going to be done with either until you are done. We don't talk about that. No, but let's not talk about that. No, but the point is that having a sense of that, and I've been bringing up this book quite a lot lately. Oliver Berkman's 4,000 Weeks. It's a book that he wrote. Okay. He's written The Antidote, but this book, he's like, look, basically you have about at best 4,000 weeks to live. He locks it down there because it's about 80 years old. And he goes, we're never going to get all of those things. We have to be willing to let go of certain things. And I think that what he's trying to say is, and as it goes through, it's just, I found myself nodding a lot when I was listening to him read the book to me, right? But this idea of, you're never going to, if you get to the point where you're not going to have to worry about managing your money, I think that's a problem. Just like if you're not going to have to worry about managing your time, those things are ongoing. And I think it's important to make sure that people can do this sustainably and consistently. And what I like about YNAB is that it makes it doable. You know what I mean? It doesn't seem onerous. And when it does feel onerous, I think it's, again, the same thing you're talking about time. It's because you're putting too much into it. Or you're adding too many, and then you're like, oh,
I don't need this, or this is something that should just, I wouldn't say take care of itself on its own, but I don't want to add any more to this because it's not essential. So go ahead. Yeah.
We see it like, well, some examples of that we see are like brass tacks. People will go in and they'll forecast what they will earn and forget being self-employed for a second.
Right.
So that's a whole other beast on its own. But they will just go in and say, well, I'm going to make this, I'm going to make that. That is a dynamic variable that is all over the place. Most people do not have level earnings. They'll say, well, I have a salary, but if you look at their actual inflows, they're up and down. They get little windfalls. Things happen. It's pretty fascinating to watch. So that's one is a variable that people bring in that shouldn't be. The way that the author, I need to read that book, that he framed 4,000 weeks is he was basically saying, this is finite.
Yep.
And recognizing a finite resource demands then a level of scrutiny and rigor. Mm-hmm. And what we do in budgeting, instead of thinking about, okay, well, you'll make this much money, Mike, or hey, it'll be an up month next time. So let's patch over any kind of issues right now. No hard conversations because next month will be better. That's the siren song. What we do is say, okay, Mike, what do you have in your checking account right now? Mm-hmm. And whether it's $300 or $30,000, the exercise is the same. So, okay, with that money, what would you like to do before you're paid again? And it's a way of making it finite. It's the same way we look at a day and we say, okay, this day, what do I need to get done?
Yep.
We can't look 10 years out. So those two things, getting your arms around a finite resource, and that is what is in your checking account, that is the launch pad from which we can say, okay, all the other noise can kind of fall by the wayside. We're just going to focus on a known number, money in your account. There are a few other things that people are doing to try and manage their money well. They'll open up lots of accounts. They'll hide money from themselves. Mm-hmm. They'll kind of have arbitrary rules. All of them are fine, but a lot of times it's just a lot of extra noise for not a lot of value.
Well, yeah, and the same thing happens with to-do lists, right? Like they will say, yeah. I'm going to work on this project, and they'll just write down work on X project. I'm like, you're not going to make any progress because you need to break it down into smaller particles. Same thing with like you've got the categories, but then sometimes inside of those, they're like you've got the headers, and we've done this with ours. We're like, like we went on a trip this summer and we put everything. We could have gone really micromanaged and said, okay, this trip, we're going to have a dining budget. We could have done all that. We're like, no, you know what? We know, let's mentally figure out, here's how much money we have. How much can we spend on this trip? And that means everything. Like, so we could have gone to that granular level of we can only spend $400 on food and this, but that would have sullied the experience, right? Mm-hmm. Like we're just going to go, this is the budget for the trip. We may have money left over, we may not, but this is, and the adage that you talk about, which again, there's that relation between time and money. Every dollar has a job. Well, every day has a job. Every week has every cent has a job. Like, I mean, there is, once you start to work in the present tense, which is what YNAB really does. I mean, yes, you've got the goals that you can say. It really is powerful because it gives you heightened awareness, clarity, perspective, all those soft skills that will allow you to go, oh, here's what's really happening. How can I make sure that nothing's going to fall by the wayside while all of this stuff is happening, right?
Yes. Yeah. So you're doing these present calculations. With time, you're kind of saying, okay, I have this objective in the future. And if you're doing it well, you're breaking it up and you're saying, here's what I need to do kind of along the way. Mm-hmm. So you are projecting, but you're dealing with a finite resource that is the day ahead of you.
Right.
And we do the second rule. I mean, you mentioned our first rule of giving every dollar a job, and that's tantamount to just you have to, or it's paramount to just the whole system. The second rule we're talking about is embracing your true expenses. And it's akin to a project where we're saying, okay, there are larger, less frequent expenses that will just kind of suddenly sneak up on you. Like my kid's science book, that they're supposed to read this book and write a paper or whatever. And they're like, oh, Dad, this is due tomorrow. And you're like, I don't think it was assigned today though, and we often act like our expenses are like, I had no idea. I just snuck up. It's like a homework assignment was given 3 months ago. So in that sense, you are always operating in the present, but it's like you have future Mike that's there and it's like, hey, the project will be due and I'll be the one walking up to the client or whatever with this. So we need to start, and like the both of you together, current Mike, future Mike, are negotiating like what's current Mike going to do to move this along.
Yep.
And we need to do that with our money. So when we say, hey, I want to spend money for this trip you were mentioning, you know, like it's going to be in 6 months. It's like future Vardis. They're there, they're having fun, and they're just like, guys, throw us a bone. We don't want the experience sold. We want to be able to just enjoy ourselves, not penny pinch. And so current Vardis are like, okay, yeah, well, we can manage that. But it's all in balance. There's this tension between like, should we go out tonight for sushi and the trip in 6 months? And that's the beauty of it, where you're negotiating your current to-dos with big projects that are like the Stephen Covey thing, like the important, but not like, hair on fire type stuff. That's so many expenses are that way. When they hit, explosions. And we're like, just this month is abnormal. Every other month is normal. Not the case at all. We will always have these big expenses that creep up. So we want to consider the future, but within the constraint of current resources. And that's where the magic starts happening.
Do you think that, as you're talking about this, I was thinking about like the matrix you're talking about, the Eisenhower matrix, the Covey matrix. And in my experience, more people have things in that urgent, important category than there ever should be. We know that there should be very few things in there. Do you find the same thing with money as well? Because I think there's that correlation there where it's like, oh shit. This is both important and urgent now. So again, like we need to, the vacation thing. Oh crap, we leave tomorrow. We're going to have to borrow money off of the card. Like, you know what I mean? Like I think that there's that urgent, important thing ends up, or even a misconflation of this is urgent now. It really isn't important, but they get that confusion there because do you find that happening with
I
money?
do think the urgency, the urgency is what causes people to swipe the card. It's like the car tire blew out because car tires wear out. I will be the first in line to buy infinitely useful car tires.
Sure.
But until then, they'll wear out. And so it is not urgent by definition because the car is functioning perfectly. The project is not urgent by definition because it's not due yet. But as soon as the due date hits, as soon as the car tire blows, it moves into urgency. And neither you nor I can sit there to that person on the side of the road and be like, oh no, it's not urgent. They're like, no, it is.
Yep.
But did it have to be? That's the ticket. So often YNABers will, we're told in mainstream personal finance, of which I'm definitely a part for the most part, 3 to 6 months of emergency funds, right? That's a kind of a standard trope. What YNABers find out is as they're looking ahead to larger, less frequent expenses, and they're looking back at their bank statement and finding like where 4 digits pop out or 5 digits pop out, like what was that? What was that? You can start to kind of be informed of these recurring things that are irregular but regular. If they become more and more aware of the fact that water heaters fail and kids have to have their arms put in a cast or whatever, these are all personal experience recently. That's why I'm saying those. Yeah. The idea is that these emergencies, these urgencies that we experience, they really aren't. And as people look ahead and start to plan for the future following our second rule, they notice that if they do have a little emergency fund, 3 to 6 months, it just doesn't get touched because it's not an emergency if you're ready for it.
Right.
And that's where we start to try and see people, like we see these, these connections being made in their mind. I love when someone has their water heater go out, not on its face. I don't love it. But
you're just going around going, ha, ha, ha.
Yeah. No. Oh, that was great. You'll learn something. This will be fantastic. No, but it's very much just, I love it when they're like, yeah, the water heater went out. Life goes on. Super normal month. We really want to just get finances boring.
Right. Well, what's interesting is one of the things that I ask people to do with their to-do list apps, because again, YNAB allows apps are great in the terms of storage and heightened awareness because you can see them. And I mean, the fact that you can go onto YNAB and I can enter things, and I did the other day. I think I bought, I went and watched a wrestling pay-per-view, and I went to McDonald's because the guy was late. And so we ended up I'm like, okay, well, I need to eat. We were going to eat at his place. He's late. I'm going to go. What do I have left for dining? Oh, I can spend $10 at McDonald's. Fine, I'll go eat at McDonald's. Yeah. And I just entered it at the time. And we have and the great thing is that it seemed really weird, but I went to McDonald's, had the food, used the Walmart credit card to pay for it because my wife wants us to use that more because we get points. Everything happened in that. I'm like, okay, well, we know that's there. I immediately put the money back on the Walmart credit card right away. The money, all the money did was move around, but the money was there to do its job, and I never went beyond. interesting about the to-do list is like I have people that say, like, I use holiday lights as an example all the time, Christmas lights, where it's like, do you put up Christmas lights every year? Like, of course. I'm like, when do you put them up? And they're like, I'm like, December 1st. Is it like, do you have a date? They're like, well, no. I'm like, I bet you put them up when you drive through your neighborhood and you think about it as soon as you see somebody having their Christmas lights up. And they're like, I'm like, that's the trigger, right? I said, what if you had it in your to-do list app that every, I don't know, the day after Thanksgiving, you got a reminder. Remember, and that's the other thing too, is that with to-do list apps, I don't like due dates on those. I refer to them as attention dates. All the to-do list app is supposed to do is go, hey, you might want to think about doing this. You don't have to do it today, but I'm bringing this to your attention because, again, past Mike knew that he would want to put the Christmas lights up sometime before Christmas, not a week before Christmas, maybe not even 2 months before Christmas, or worst case scenario, leave them up all year round and just like have them. And people don't think about the mundane, putting those things that recur, like taking the garden hose. Where we live, there's parts of the year where you don't want the garden hoses sitting out. You put them away. Or like I have recurring, and it's like, why is that stuff there? I go, because I don't want to have to think about it. Yeah. Not all the time. I wanted to, like, someone bring it to my attention, go, hoses need to go out. Great. Yeah, you're right, because summer's coming and we want to be able to walk. I don't want to be thinking about that when I see my grass or my garden dying. I'm like, oh, crap. If only I had put it. There has to be a better way. Like, I think the same thing happens with finances when you have a way of paying attention to it. And productivity is this way. Productivity is the marriage of intention and attention. What do you intend to do? How are you going to pay attention to it? And I think money, it works the same way. What do you intend to do with it? Okay, how are you going to pay attention to it? And YNAB allows for that to happen, at least for me, and I know for lots of, they're called YNABers. Like it's a community too, right?
Welcome to the club. Yes, absolutely. I love that the marriage of attention, or of intention and attention. It is the same. What we're saying first is we need you to intend something with your money first. Yeah. And then you do need to attend to it. You can't just be like, I intend this, and then you walk away. Yep. That doesn't work. Like when you go into McDonald's, you checked dining out. That was you attending to your former intention to spend only X on dining, right? Yep. So I love that. I'll probably have to steal that for the podcast as well, because that marriage of the two, it can't be one or the other. It is definitely both. If you don't have any intention, then it's aimless. Your money just does whatever due date came up late, whatever bill's on top, someone else, like, it's like when you go to hop into email to tell, to have someone else tell you what to do. It's kind of that idea. Like that happens with our money all the time. We just go into the bank account and you're like, oh, okay. I
often say that intention without attention is powerless, and attention without intention is aimless. And that's really what it is.
Oh, man, right? You have so many good one-liners, Mike. Like, this is...
Well, when we talk about due dates too, like you talked earlier about like future Mike, like instead of worrying about a due date, which is what a lot of people do. And we're if we were taught time management and money management in school to a greater deal, we might not be cramming at the last minute. And what's worse is when it works out. If it works out a lot when you cram, and then you're like, oh, it's that confidence thing, confidence and competence. But the danger is the complacency, right? It's when it becomes like, absolutely. And then all of a sudden you fail. You're like, well, why did I fail? Well, because you crammed 14 times and it worked, but this was the one that it didn't. I've run across this when I've done speeches. I've got a gift for improv, and I would be like, oh, I'll do okay. And then one time I didn't do okay. I'm like, oh, I look like a hack. Well, I can't do that. But the other great thing about that McDonald's experience wasn't that I went in saying, I don't know if I can afford to dine out. It was, how much am I willing to spend? Like, I went in and said, oh, I could spend $10 and be fine. But if it was like, oh, you know what, I'll only buy a $5 thing because I can wait. Like, so again, it was that heightened awareness around such a small thing that allowed for bigger. I walked out of there going, no big deal. I think a lot of people walk out going, no big deal, but they don't have, like you said, that attention to it going, was it really not a big deal? Because it might be later. And I think that's powerful.
It's a shame when people are ask themselves, the most stressful question we ask around money is, can I afford this? Whether it's like, can I afford this engagement ring? That's stressful, but also like, can I afford to go out to this restaurant or that restaurant or whatever? And the sad thing is when people, let's say they can technically afford it, they have the money and they will be no worse for wear. They buy it. They don't know if they actually could afford it or not. So there's still consternation. And if they can't afford it and they buy it, which you can do through cards quite easily in our day and age, then they also they're feeling guilty for sure because they just did that thing they swore they wouldn't do. I put it on the card. I swore I wouldn't do this. So they're feeling guilty. They're now paying, who knows what actually at the end of the day for all the interest and everything. But neither answer is, either yes, I can buy it and they really could, but they don't know they could, stressful, or they couldn't and they did it, stressful.
Yep.
And so what we try and do is, people look at, it's like what you were saying, like do the project as your main to do. People look at their bank balance as this information source of like, can I afford this? And it's I almost wish banks wouldn't tell us anything. They're just like, well, how much is in your restaurant budget? How much is in your, tools for the house budget, whatever it is. But the just pile of money, like, oh, you have $1,000. It doesn't tell you anything except what the balance is.
Right.
We don't know if we can afford things. And so akin to breaking up the project into smaller and smaller pieces, we take that pile of money and say, okay, I actually can't make any good decisions just thinking about the project in this largest sense. I can't make any good decisions just looking at my $1,000. But once I start breaking it up, once I start looking at bills that are due and ask myself, what do I need to do? Then suddenly those smaller, more discrete piles of money, you're making good decisions. And then you're like, oh, I'll just go to McDonald's. I can swing that. Good decision. Versus, who knows what else people are doing.
Going to the pub, I'll have a beer and a bigger meal. And I'm like, I don't need that. I'm going to it's just, and we're constantly making decisions. We're constantly making choices, and every choice has a consequence, good or bad. And and I was going to ask you as we get close to wrapping up here, you need a budget. As I embraced it, I realized like this is not, I'm going to use the term conventional. Like most people don't think of this in terms of conventional, the way that, because it's, again, like time, people are like, okay, well, do as much as you can, get as much done, get to inbox 0, you get that done, you had a productive day. Well, you know what, I spent this money, I looked at my bank balance, I still have money there, no big deal, I paid my bills. Again, and that's the other thing too. I paid all my bills. Now I have this much money left, instead of doing the whole like pay yourself for like profit first, which is again, I'll link to the Mike McCallowitz episode because I learned about profit first, and that's another phenomenal and rather unconventional way to manage finances. How do you get people to embrace YNAB in the way that it's constructed? When it's almost like you're swimming upstream to a degree.
Yeah.
How have you managed to do that? Because once they're in, I think. Like it's like getting things done. The getting things done. They're called GTDers, and people who follow the time management stuff that I teach. Once they're in, they're like, oh, why wasn't I doing this before? It just seems to make sense. Same thing with
it all seems obvious after the fact. Like we look for those light bulb moments for people where they're just like, oh, and it clicks. I mean, we're swimming upstream when we say, the company is, you need a budget, and people are like, oh, no. Like they just like, I don't want anything to do with that. So we're used to swimming upstream perhaps, but we try and really quickly get people doing very concrete things. So tiny things. And we get them started with just what's in your bank account. And they'll say things like, well, I get paid Friday. So don't, we're like, no. We want it simple. What's in your bank account? Akin to, GTD, it's just like, okay, everything in your head, everything on paper, right? Like the whole, this process, you got to start with something super concrete. And so we start them on that step. And then we'll just say, what does that money need to do before you're paid again? And they'll so quickly still be like, well, when I'm paid Friday, then, and it's like, no, just for now, this. And they'll be like, well, I got to fill up the car because it was a quarter tank and, buy some food. The fridge is kind of empty. And I have this one bill that's due tomorrow. And that's all their money. And on average, people are walking around, at least in the US, their average bank account balance is around $300. It's high, but then it just drops because there's a pile of bills waiting for the money and they just pounce. So we try and flip it around, and eventually you get a pile of money waiting for bills, but that takes about 4 months for people. But the idea is just to start them super small. So then after that money is assigned to those specific jobs, it's amazing how often people will say, oh my gosh, I feel better. Like I feel more in control, and they haven't made more money. They haven't even paid the bill that's due tomorrow yet, but they feel better. That's that little dopamine hit we hope they experience early on. So in software and UX and all of the work we do in product development, we're trying to get them to be like, oh, I feel this. This is good. And then we just teach like crazy. So we have, more than half of our team are support people doing live chat, emails. because we recognize like we're not meant, we're not this set it and forget it. Like we are in the ring. I'm going to use wrestling for you. We're in the ring with you, and or like, hey, come on, call us over or whatever. We have our metal chair ready. I'm struggling, but I'm going to try, Mike, to just do whatever I can.
Yeah.
It's working maybe, but so at the end of the day, we're there to support people, and we've seen they don't leave once they let us teach them. So we're an education company masquerading as a software company, and we're really trying to rewire just how people think about their money, and it starts with those few steps.
You know, as you were talking about the idea of the bills and the noise that comes from it, because they're loud and they reach out to you. Yeah. It's a lot like your email inbox compared to your own to-do list.
Oh, gosh, yeah.
You know what I mean? Yeah. Like your email inbox is everybody else's demands. You deal with it's, again, you're dealing with those first, like, okay, now I have time to do my stuff, but they don't because their energy's been sapped, all that stuff. And I mean, I'm sure you're in the same boat. I'm not, when it comes to bills and stuff, I'm not saying ignore that stuff. I'm not saying don't listen to the emails. What I'm saying is, and I used to say, and again, my perspective has changed over the years. I used to say, don't answer email first thing in the morning. Don't check email first thing in the morning. But then you have people, again, because there's gaps in our knowledge, say, I'm a CSR person, I'm customer sales. That's my job. I have to check email first thing in the morning. I'm like, okay. But then go to bed the night before or start the day with some of your own intentions, so at least they're there in front of you. So yes, you might have to deal with those, but learn how to manage those external forces so you can deal with the internal forces that are going to have you have that same feeling you talked about, which is like, I feel better. I got at least, one of the things I talk about now is like 6 things. Do your 6 things. The 6 I call it. Like if it's six of your intentions, which by the way, could be somebody else's. One of them could be, I need to respond to the boss about that thing. But if it's your intention, that's great because now they're married, right? So if you can do those, at the end of the day, you close that, we do it in the shape of a hexagon. You close that hex, you're good. You close the hexagon, you're like, okay, I'm still going to do all the other stuff, but I did those 6 things. And I think what happens is we get stuck in, like you said, you do these 3 things, the gas, the food, the bill, done. Oh, I managed my money today. The money I had with real, like the actual tangible things. Because let's face it, time you can't hold. And at this point, fewer people are holding on to money too. It's all right. It's all numbers. So I think that there is the reason I wanted to chat with you is not only because I'm a huge fan. And by the way, people are listening to this and or watching this on YouTube are going, wow, this episode must be sponsored by You Need a Budget. I'm like, nope, I'm a big fan. I use it. I love it. And I think it's worth exploring. But also the fact of the matter is that it really does it flips the switch for me. It flipped the switch where I'm like, this is exactly how I treat my to-do list, my time, all that stuff. If I treat money the same way, they're all working together. Like it's just an interesting and revolutionary is not quite the right word, but it's by flipping the story and changing the story in your head about these things. I think it really makes a difference. And then again, knowing that it's a journey. It's all about the process as opposed to, well, what does it look like at the end? I'm like, I don't know. None of us know. So let's just keep going along with it. What's the future hold for you and You Need a Budget? Because I know that, you've got the book, the company has grown. We talked about before we started recording the idea of where I got into it, which is through Steam, which people now know is like, oh, this is where I buy games. No, you can buy other things through it too, apparently, budgeting software. What's the future hold?
Yeah, we're hard at work, really trying to crack some problems around debt, making. So we aren't anti-debt, but most people, if you boost their awareness, you boost their intention, or their awareness of what their intentions have been. They're kind of been aimless. You do find that most people are like, oh, I want to get rid of that. Yeah, like that. So we are trying to build more tooling into that. Another one that's really interesting is the partner space where you have people sharing finances and how we could be more helpful there. The different dynamics between partners and how how partnerships approach this, where they're, 2 spouses are like, oh, I'm not doing it this way at all. And how people have 100 different ways of getting along with money and with each other. And we want to facilitate that better. So there's that. And then I'm really intrigued by having a lot of small businesses start to follow our 4 rules. And small businesses fail too often because of cash flow. Good product, good, even like brilliant person, but just the money hasn't been managed right. And I think we would do well there to just get people, again, that marriage of intention awareness, like you said, it's just, that's the key. So those are kind of like big picture things on my plate. And then you have 1,000 other things that are going at the same time, but I try and leave those in the capable hands of others. So
it's speaking of the partner thing, for me and my wife, like, she's always wanted to get me to do this, but she's not super tech savvy. So the fact that we were able to find this as a quote, like, equal ground or equal footing, I'm like, this works for me. She goes, oh, well, I'll update it and I'll use it. And I'm like, okay, great. And so I got excited about it. Plus, the fact is that, we're each using it, the app. I mean, having Alexa, we have a Echo upstairs, and to be able to say, hey, can you do this? Can you do that? And it's creating what it's also done. And I don't think people realize this, especially with partnerships, is, you end up not having to sit down and talk about money as much, and you can actually just enjoy date nights. Like, you can go on a date night where you're not like, okay, well, let's talk about the fun. Like, I actually have we actually have this in our house called the effing meeting, and it's food, finance, and family. So we talk about, like, what we're going to eat for the week. We're talking about finance. We're going to talk about family activities, and money plays a role in that, in all of it, really. Course. Like, what are we going to do as a family? What are we? But we sit down, we have that, and then when we want to sit down and watch a movie or want to go out for dinner, we're not sitting going, okay, well, what happened? Like, we can actually go on a date and it be a date and not talking about, like, the business of the household, which is really that. I mean, running a household is a lot like that. And to the business aspect, coupled with profit first, for my business, I'm like, oh, I can go and buy that drone that I want to use for overhead YouTube shots because I have cash flow. I have this. Oh, I'm bringing people on. Oh, I can do this project that I wanted to do because of this. It's just really freeing. And again, it's like anything else. It's habitual. You have to get used to it because there is the automation isn't, technical. It's mental. It's the mental automation going, I've got to update YNAB. I've got to update YNAB. This is going into YNAB. And once it just becomes part of it, it's flow. And that's what I really, really like. So Jesse, this has been great. I don't want to keep you much longer, but where can people keep up with you and your work? And obviously, I mean, how can people? What's one? Let's go over before we wrap up. We talked about the 2 rules for sure. Let's close out with the other 2 rules so that people have a sense. We don't have to go too deep into them, but talk about those real quickly, and then where can people keep up with you?
Yeah. So the 3rd rule, we kind of hit on it the very first. It's weird that it's a rule, but it's called roll with the punches, meaning that when life changes, you just change your budget. The budget is a fluid thing. Rigid budgets break.
Yep.
And so we want a flexible budget that's adaptive. Just like you go in with a plan for your day, and then you get a call from the school, and they're like, "Hey, so and so forgot their shoes, whatever." And you're like,
what's that quote by Eisenhower? When going into battle, I find planning to be useful, but plans useless.
Oh, I love that. I love that. So that is rule 3. It's universal. So we adjust as needed. The 4th rule, we call it aging your money. And it's the idea that the dollar you earn today, you won't spend until, 30, 45 days from now. Or said another way, a dollar I'm using today, I earned 45 days ago.
Right.
The first 3 rules will get you there. So there's nothing to do with that 4th rule. It's just it's a mode of operating where we're having people step back from the financial edge a little bit and not live paycheck to paycheck. Decision quality increases when you aren't living paycheck to paycheck or client to client, right? So in that sense, we just want people to have a little more breathing room between them and imminent demise of their finances. And this does the job.
Right. And that removes we talked about urgency and emergency earlier on. When you do that, all of a sudden that urgency, because when you are faced with urgency, you're in a time-based mindset. You may make decisions that are like, you have to make them quickly, but they may not be the best ones. Whereas if it's a task-based mindset, so you've got the resources, you can go, okay, let's sit with this. And we have, again, greater clarity. You have time on your side so you can make these choices. And the likelihood of them being better choices is higher, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Options are wealth. So a little bit of space between you and that cliff, those are options.
See, we've dropped so many one-liners during this episode. People are going to be like quoting them. It'll and Huff Duffer and all those, what's listen notes? There's going to be just a bunch of one-liners from us.
There we go. Yeah, that'll be great.
Jesse, where can people keep up with you and the work? And thanks again for taking the time today.
Absolutely. So the website is youneedabudget.com, or if you're trying to be productive, YNAB.com. You just type in those 4 letters,
There you go.
same spot. I'm not on any of the socials or anything for productive reasons, but people can email me at jesse@ynab.com, and I'm happy. I'll respond either Monday or Thursday. Not always the next Monday or Thursday, but it'll be on one of those days for sure. So
awesome. Jesse, thanks again for joining me for a productive conversation today.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Man, oh man. I'm so glad that I had the time and the attention and all that stuff and the intention to talk to Jesse. When Jesse and I decided to have this conversation, I was elated. I'm glad that we were able to do it. I'm hoping that you enjoyed it. If you did, you don't want to miss a single episode of what's to come. You also want to probably hear some of the past conversations I've had, and you can do so by subscribing to the podcast. Just hit the subscribe button in the podcast app that you're using. And by the way, if you want to check out more of the show notes beyond what is in the podcast app you're using, go to productivityist.com/podcast 397. You can get all the show notes there as well. Plus, you can also easily access the sponsors of this episode. You can go there. You can also go to productivityist.com/podcast sponsors to look at all of the sponsors of this podcast, as well as ones for this particular episode. That's it for now. Thanks so much for taking the time to join me for a productive conversation. I'm Mike Vardy, and until next time, I'm reminding you to stop doing productive and start being productive. See you later.